When we interview with folks out of non-science, we worry more about the scientists who are watching us. If people want to hear the nitty-gritty, they'll ask. And you're not lying if you start in strong, big picture, strong statements that are difficult to push back on unless you have some other robust data to against. And then as the story and develops, and if it gets richer and more intimate, then you can start to talk about gaps and areas of concern. But don't think about them as gaps and areas of concern. Think about those as opportunities to explore more.
The Rational View is a weekly series hosted by me, Dr. Alan Scott, providing a rational, evidence-based perspective on important societal issues.
Produced by Soapbox Media.
The world needs evidence-based public policy now more than ever. Making the right decisions should not be partisan politics. Please help spread The Rational View by going to patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Together, we can make a better future. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The Rational View. I'm your host, Dr. Al Scott. In this episode, I'm returning to a core topic of The Rational View: the communication of science. This is why I made this podcast, to combat anti-science thinking and to bring rational thought into the public discussion. My guest today has experience communicating science to the public during environmental crises and has shared his experience and advice for other scientists in a newly published book. What are the mistakes that scientists make in outreach, and how can we do a better job without endangering our careers? If you like what you're hearing, I would love you to press like on your podcast app and show the love. Come join us on our Facebook group, The Rational View, and we can have some more in-depth discussions about this and hear your thoughts. I'd love to chat with you. Christopher Reddy is a leader in the study of marine pollution and the development of environmentally friendly industrial chemicals. A senior scientist in the Department of Marine Chemistry and Geochemistry at Wood Hole Oceanographic Institute, and faculty member of the MIT WHOI Joint Program on Oceanography. Reddy has led numerous field operations along coastlines, in the open ocean, and at the bottom of the sea to conduct transformative research that crosses disciplines and guides policy decisions worldwide. As an author, Dr. Reddy has recently published Science Communication in a Crisis. Dr. Reddy, welcome to The Rational View.
Oh, thanks. I'm really happy to be here. I appreciate the intro. It'll make my mom proud and happy.
So could you just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got interested in oceanography? I guess that was your work as in university?
Yeah, I grew up in Rhode Island, the smallest state in the Union. I was number 6 of 7 kids. My mom wanted to be a scientist, but ended up having a lot of kids. And her dad was, would have been Doc Brown from Back to the Future. So I always had kind of the how things work vibe to me. But I wasn't a very good student, I would say. I never really worked very hard and kind of muddled through my life. And eventually I got a bachelor's degree in chemistry and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. And then on a whim, my boss goes, you should go down the street and go to graduate school. And this guy is really great, who studies the oceanography. He's a chemical oceanographer, but I think you guys would work. And on my lunch break, I was working analyzing drinking water, for pollutants. I went and saw this guy, Jim Quinn. Guy transformed my life, gave me meaning, told me I was good. And there it was. Wow, that's pretty good. So you had a good supervisor who kind of led you into the work, and then you got involved in oil, I guess, or petrochemicals? I would say, let me correct you, despite the fact that I wasn't a very good student, I think my whole life, and I've been through the public school systems from kindergarten to PhD, I can name you about 7 science teachers who always looked out and thought better of me than I thought of myself. And I consider myself really lucky because of that. For my PhD, just at that time, there was a lot of interest in using recycled automobile tires add them as modifier to roads. There was a lot of interest about whether or not it was better for the environment. Was it a better product? And so for about 2/3 of my PhD, I worked with a civil engineer and graduate student, and he simulated rainfall and other type of weathering on a road that he actually made. And then I looked at the runoff of the water that washes off a road, and I looked at the chemicals, and I compared what chemicals were coming off a regular road and then what was coming off these tire embedded roads, and that was about half of my PhD.
Very interesting. So you've had I would say, a long and distinguished career, and you've recently published a new book called Science Communication in a Crisis. So what is your background, your experience in outreach and science communication that led you to this book?
A lot of mistakes and a lot of oil spills. And I think I have a little bit of ambulance chaser in me, collectively. So I had, for the funding kind of ran out on my PhD thesis to study the roads. Ended up writing one paper about it, but just by chance there was an oil spill not too far where I was going to graduate school in Rhode Island. Did some work on it, ended up making it part of my thesis, kind of got interested in a lot of the dynamics of an oil spill, and actually the kind of the community aspect. I kind of liked the idea that what I was working on was kind of rolling out in real time. So that's where I kind of got interested in it. Finished my PhD. I did a postdoc at Wood Hole Oceanographic Institution where I've been since then. And I just started studying oil spills, whether or not they were the remains of old ones that you could go sniff them out, or whether or not they were, one that was real time. I mean, I'm completely unofficial. I mean, I'm not in the Coast Guard, but to me, an oil spill is just an opportunity to see how nature responds to an uninvited guest. The point is, though, that when an oil spill happens, there's a lot of other parties who are interested in, like it or not, or actually, I think it's a good thing. People want to know what you know. And so just by nature of studying things that are in the news or affect your everyday life, and whether or not you're going to go to the beach or whether or not you still have a job at the fishing factory, you end up communicating science.
Right. So you have been interviewed by the press. You've given press conferences. I think you've even addressed Congress. Is that correct?
5 times.
5
US
times.
Congress.
And this is all to do with oil spills?
Yeah. And then some state and local and things like that. And maybe one on plastic at a state level. And even in my local town, I talked about pesticides. So, but yeah.
Okay, that's very cool. So your book is showing lessons learned. So to learn lessons, you have to fail. And you provide some examples of poor science communication in your book. Could you share an anecdote or two on bad communication?
I think the one that always kind of bothers me was I was supposed to be on Good Morning America on a Monday morning. And on Sunday night, they wanted to come tape me in my lab. It was in the heat of the Deepwater Horizon oil spill, a disaster, which was in 2010 in April. And this was now July or August. And I was tired. I was exhausted. I was working every day. I had probably done 15 trips down to the Gulf. It was all out. And I had a lot of media training, I had a lot of media experiences, and I was just tired, and I was cranky. And these great video folks come into my lab, and even for a couple minute spot, they're there for 2 hours, and you're standing there and you're uncomfortable, and these guys are working really hard, and ultimately the interviewer really wanted me to say something, and he was kind of baiting me, I would say, to give some type of end of the world, and I didn't really want to go there, and I just kept pushing back. I didn't feed him. I didn't nourish him. I didn't have a successful outcome, and then eventually the guy was handsome. It looked like he spent some time, working on his hair. And I eventually said, if you don't tell me how to do science, I'm not going to tell you how to blow dry your hair. And that was it. They left. And, it was bad for me. It was bad for my institution. It was bad for science. And, in theory, Good Morning America is such a huge platform. If I could have done a better job, I might have given some information that added clarity and comfort to those folks who were most deeply affected. So that's a pretty big failure considering the platform and the reach of Good Morning America and the insultingness. It was kind of jerky.
Yeah, but so what did you learn from that? The journalist was pushing you to give a devastating critique of the oil spill,
Yeah.
and that scientifically you weren't prepared to do that. So you don't want
Yeah.
to obviously compromise your scientific integrity. How should you have responded in that situation? What could you have done?
Well, in a more global sense, I should have just said no. I mean, I was not in a good place. I was super tired. I was at the beach with my wife. I was complaining the whole time that I didn't want to go do this. I knew it was only a couple minutes, Bob, but I knew that was a couple hours. I knew I had a big week. And, a lot of times, as scientists, and just like anybody else, we're excited when somebody wants to hear from you, right? It's
Yeah.
a huge ego
Mm-hmm.
boost. And, there's a competition aspect. I wanted to be out there while one of my other counterparts wasn't going to be on Good Morning America. And I also thought that I was better than them. So, you got competition, you got ego, you got tired, you got cranky. The end result was I should have just said no.
Okay.
After that, before, if I said yes and I was in a good place, I should have went and watched what this guy was up to, what his interests were, what his angle was, his interview style. I didn't do my homework. I listened to you beforehand. I checked you out. I understood how you work. I didn't do that. So I walked in cold. I didn't know this guy's angle. I didn't know his audience. I was cranky. It was all that. And, I should have been able to, what they say in communicating, I should have been able to block and bridge. I should have been able to be nimble. I should have been able to turn that conversation around. But for whatever reason, I was just fighting this guy. No, I'm not going to say this. I'm not going to say this. No, that's not true. And, no, not that's true. And I'm not going to say that does not go along when, in a major media platform. So I'm not going to say it would have been easy either.
Sure.
I mean, I don't think that would have been easier, an easy interview at all, but I think I could have done better than that. And that's,
It's tough to say no though in a situation like that. I could just imagine, a huge platform like that. You want to get the word out there. You want to represent for the science. I mean, that would be almost impossible for me to say no as well. I can understand exactly what you're saying.
and that's exactly right. That's exactly right. I mean, in some respects, I've given a lot of interviews even by then. I've been on TV and all these things. But I don't think, and I have to go back and check. I don't think I ever would have had as big of an audience as Good Morning America,
Yeah.
and I think a really widespread audience. I mean, the morning shows when we were kids, that was the end all be all. I mean, it's not as big as it is now, but still, I had a great audience. And I blew it.
You mentioned in your book that your supervisor advised you not to talk to the press regarding that oil spill near your university.
Yeah.
And you agreed with that, like you weren't ready to talk to the press. How do we have the wisdom to say no? What can scientists? How do scientists have ego? I mean, this is something that happens.
Yeah.
You're trying to make a great discovery and get a Nobel Prize or whatever you're trying to do. What wisdom can you impart to share with someone how to know whether to take on an interview opportunity?
I think the most importantly is to go back and look at the risk versus the reward. I mean, I think, we get excited, but we really have to say, if you have a successful outcome, where does that put you? But on the flip side, if that is not a successful outcome, where does it put you? And, sadly, and a lot of times in computer-gated science and in academia, one small mistake is not crossed off very quickly. Going back to that example of my PhD advisors telling me not to talk to the media, the risk was large because he was my advisor. So, and the reward was none because if I'd done it, he was very old school. He was a wonderful, lovely guy, Jim Quinn. I cannot thank him enough. But he was old school enough that if I had gone on the radio or TV the day after he left, he probably would have come back home. I mean, he was skiing up in Vermont. If he had heard, I can't even imagine the world of trouble I would have gotten on if I had done what he categorically said no, and I could tell that wasn't true. I also had known him for several years, so I knew his style. He was a very careful, thoughtful guy, and also very controlled. And, when you go on the media, you have to have an understanding that you cannot control it. And so, there it is. After that, you have to look at yourself and what your value system is personally, about what the risk versus the reward is. And that's just it. And, my advice to junior scientists and other people is talk to people who actually help you decide what risk versus reward is. So if you have a PhD advisor, you should talk to them. If you have a department chair, you should talk to friends, and game this out. The sad part about it is you don't have a lot of time if the media is knocking on your door. But if you don't have time and you're not ready, don't do it.
Yeah, the risks are not always obvious to someone who's not experienced. I think you mentioned something like being Saganized.
Yeah.
Can you tell us what that means? What is being Saganized?
Well, I mean, go back to Carl Sagan, who's arguably one of the most influential scientists of the last century, on so many platforms. But I mean, at the end of the day, Carl was, Carl, I've never met him, was, way ahead of his game. And as you know, when you're ahead of the pack and you think outside the box and yet you're really smart, that can scare a lot of people and it makes folks nervous. And I think in Carl's case, he was so way ahead of the curve, it was made other people uncomfortable. I think he was really smart. But, in a more global case, if you go against the norm and there is a norm that being popular in the news and TV is, not valued that much, then, that's how you can get Saganized. The upside is Carl didn't make many mistakes. He didn't, I mean, to the point where he was really, really good. And so that was his upside is as he also was honed and he was in fantastic science communicating shape. I mean, before he goes on Johnny Carson, he's done hundreds of interviews, right? He has tangoed with everybody from, school teachers all the way up to NASA administrators. So he was in great fighting shape when he was ready to rock and roll. And I think that's part of the sense of awareness and the risk versus the reward is, am I ready? Am I have a level of science communication fitness to be sure?
Sagan actually suffered, his career suffered, you claim, because of his communication. What actually happened to him?
He didn't get tenure. He didn't get tenure at Harvard. He made people nervous.
So the tenure committee did not approve him to become a tenured professor.
Yeah, no, he actually got a pretty damning letter. So when you go out for tenure, they go out for letters both internally, the own faculty at your university, and then outside at a place like Harvard. The letters that are evaluating you are Nobel Prize winners and other extremely distinguished people, and one of his letter writers who didn't support his tenure was Harold Urey, who was one of the most influential geochemists of the last century, and even now. And, Urey didn't write a very strong letter of support. But years later, and again, Sagan didn't know who his letter writers were. Years later, Urey went up to Sagan and said, I made a mistake.
Wow. Yeah, the atmosphere has always been very against outreach. And I know, as scientists, communication isn't one of our fortes. We didn't go into scientists because we're good communicators. We went into scientists because we don't like people and want to talk to them. It wasn't, communication and outreach wasn't taught in science school. It was barely mentioned, and mainly as a slightly unsavory thing that some ex-scientists do, when they don't get a professorship. Why are we so notoriously bad at communicating? What mistakes do we make?
Ooh. Well, I mean, there are efforts to get science communication into a curriculum, and and it's more, I think, more appreciated and recognized when you're at a faculty level. But the bigger challenge is that there is no currency. You don't get so many peer review points for giving a good interview or good science communication. It's just not on. There's a lot of word, a lot of talk, but at the end of the day, it's not incorporated into, I believe, the currency and the value system of how we reward in academia. But on a bigger picture, I think that scientists think science communication is not using the metric system. and, not using jargon and things like that. These kind of things that you learn in a couple hour workshop, which are fine. But I would start off thinking this is more of an anthropology class, and thinking about who are you going to talk to? What is their value system? What does it matter to them? What kind of time scales are they interested in? And then start to train them about, how to give a 2-minute response, or, we go in and teach folks or give them I think the bare minimum, which is fine. You got to start someplace. But I would start figuring out, like, okay, if somebody's going to talk to you, how would you talk to this type of person versus this person? And, ultimately you gotta understand who you're working with, because it's not a binary pool of scientists and non-scientists.
Yeah, no, that's very important advice. And I think a lot of scientists aren't even remotely aware of the aspects of communication that they need to say win a debate, for example. I've seen, scientists feel that they are experts in their field, so that they can go out and talk to anybody about it at any time. And I've seen horrible failures. For example, in the evolution creation debate, it seems like a slam dunk that, there's absolutely no science in favor of creationism, and all of the weight of hundreds of years of geological and biological evidence in favor of the other. Any scientist feels they should be able to go and win a debate, but when you go to a debate, you're talking about a professional communicator, someone who's made their life on, being a showman and talking to audiences and connecting with audiences. And scientists don't connect with audiences well. They look stilted, and they're gish galloped onto the back foot, and they just don't understand this. They'll just go and accept an interview, and that hurts the case for science, doesn't it? When people go out and do that.
Yeah, I think the bigger challenge when I watch those, because I tend to agree that the evolution arguments are probably the hardest. And, my take for the folks who are not up to fighting speed to do this is that they don't understand that that the person they're debating with doesn't follow the same rules and regulations, right? We evaluate our peers by the quality of our research and how robust we evaluate, and we appreciate that papers published in Science and Nature are and papers that have been cited 1,000 times have a lot of value, right? But if you're debating somebody who doesn't really care whether or not you've published a paper in Science or Nature, or the Journal of Venus, it doesn't matter to them. And that's the trick, is if you're going to go and debate with somebody, you better understand what their value system is and what they appreciate. And then you have a little bit better chance. But I think a lot of those folks, I just wouldn't do it. I don't think you can win, or whatever. Win's not the right word, forgive me. But I don't think you can have a successful outcome if you're not in fighting shape, you don't understand who you're going against, and you don't understand who the audience is and how they're keeping score.
Yeah. And the way that scientists communicate amongst ourselves, you're taught to put forward all of the potential objections to your argument, to clearly write out the caveats and why you might be wrong. And this is not something your opponents are going to do in a public debate, right? They're not going to play by the Earl of Queensberry rules here. And it just makes scientists look very unsure of themselves. Would you suggest that a scientist entering a debate change how they provide information and not, sound more certain? Or how do you get around this propensity to put forward all the negatives to your argument in a short soundbite type environment?
Yeah, no, I think this happens a lot. Because what happens is that when we interview with folks out of non-science, we worry more about the scientists who are watching us, right? And we're worrying about the fact that if we use an overgeneralized statement, which is pretty reasonable and pretty well, rooted in science, but we don't add that caveat, but it's uncertain a little, then our peers are going to think less of us.
Yes.
But so, we worry more about ourselves when we get these debates. And that's why, we're, going there, well, we're uncertain about this, we're uncertain about this. And, but at the end of the day, a lot of these statements, if people want to hear the nitty gritty, they'll ask. And you're not lying if you start in strong, big picture, strong statements that are difficult to push back on unless you have some other robust data to against. And then as the story and develops, and if it gets richer and more intimate, then you can start to talk about gaps and areas of concern. But don't think about them as gaps and areas of concern. Think about those as opportunities to explore more and have a richer, more deeper understanding of what the case be.
Yeah, I mean, you have to understand the colloquial understanding of our words. And, people have said that, there aren't facts in science, you're never sure. But, other people have said, a fact is something that has been so heavily supported by the evidence that it would be perverse to withhold provisional assent. And that's a fact, right? This is the more colloquial way. So you have to, as a scientist, I think, have your arguments ready for when you reach these moral dilemmas in your discussions, and be ready with quick justifications that stand up well on both sides of the argument.
In practice,
I often
a lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes. So you have you said 5 times you've talked to Congress. Tell me about your experience testifying in front of Congress and how much preparation you put into that.
Well, you're excited that somebody's calling you, right? I mean, you find out one way or the other that the staff wants you to speak, and it is a big deal. It's a big rush, and it's fine to be excited, right? But for the most part, being on camera in front of the table with your faux glasses and your best suit, that's a little bit of pageantry. At the end of the day, for the most part, your written statement, which you add, which is then in the record, that is not, if this is a really important point, more often than not, your statement, adds much more credibility. It's longer in there. But still, at the end of the day, you got 3 or 4 people sitting next to you. You got 3 or 4 minutes to talk. And, you're in a tough spot because the culture and the rules and the way in which Congress works is, it is not a fair fight. I mean, they're sitting up higher than you. They've got the microphone. They can cut the microphone off, right? You can't push back that hard. So, testifying in Congress, I would tell folks to, get your statement really strong and then practice and, just be willing to understand that you're not going to win that well. I don't think you will. I mean, you can make a pretty good case, but it's tough to be in Congress because, you're their house guest.
So how did you feel you did? Were your presentations successful? Did you lay down the law?
I don't think I failed. I don't think I did something bad, right? So I think, that my 5 statements that I wrote, I think were really strong. In fact, I went back and revisited one because I was looking for some text or something I wrote. So I feel really proud. I worked really hard on those. I would say that the interviews, the presentation, it's never great, because, you don't have you're sitting at a desk and the microphone's in the wrong spot, so, I guess my 4 minutes or 5 minutes was fine. And I don't think I ever got myself into conflict or, did anything bad for science. And at least, I spoke up for science. I do believe, and I have to go back, I think I got into a little bit of a pushback on Marco Rubio, a senator from Florida, but it wasn't contentious. I was like, I don't think that's the case, but it was fine. But yeah, it's tough, but it's also really gratifying. And, you can do a really great job, but you got to practice and you got to be really fighting shape to go up there.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I'm sure a lot of the questions are meant for theater and not in they aren't meant to be real questions, and how you deal with that, I think, is important, right? Because they're trying to get a rise out of you to discredit you, I think, in some cases.
And those questions are there already. I mean, I'm not I don't know everything about how Congress works, but for the most part, one side of the House or the Senate, has asked you to come, and, knowing what your approach is, not necessarily speak on their behalf. And, sometimes you'll be sad, like, listen, the senator, has a chance. He or she's going to ask you this question. So in some respects, you do have a sense of what's going to be asked of you. And in theory, you should not walk into many interviews with not having a sense of what you're going to be asked.
Now that's very, very useful advice for the very small percentage of us that get to testify in front of Congress.
But you could do it in your local town. I mean,
Yeah.
there are areas to insert yourself in that level. But it's hard to get even 4 minutes this day and age. You go to these town council meetings and, you're trying to get your word in edgewise in 30 seconds, and it's hard. There's a lot of pageantry and there's a lot of ego. So scientists do best when we have time and an interested audience. So you have 30 minutes or a presentation and things like that. And, that's somebody's willing to give you the time, then I think you can really do well and we can work on our strengths.
Do you think scientists should have a mandate to do outreach on their work?
I think that is very tricky, in part because we don't have a metric yet. There is no currency. There is no. You get a quarter for being on your podcast. You get a nickel for being here. You get $100 if you're on Good Morning America. We don't have that metric system, and I don't think we have an accepted metric system, that kind of system across all of academia. And so, there is people will push back on some of these metrics that, that scientists have now, H factors. And, we don't have as many statistics as American baseball, but there's enough statistics that you can get a sense of where a scientist is in their career. But there is no set rules and regulations about science communication. So I don't see, the overarching value. But I would argue that all that is related to your career. And I think personally that communicating science is about yourself. It's about a journey about learning about yourself. And I think for the most part, feeling better about yourself that you were able to inform somebody. And I can tell you many interviews I've had have gone back into my lap. So I think it's also made me a better scientist. But if you start to think about communicating science to get a promotion, I don't think it's mature yet. But communicating science to enrich yourself, to maybe expand what you know and revitalize yourself and all these things that are not necessarily directly to your career. Yeah, I would encourage folks to do it in their own comfort zone.
Yeah, I think, it's something that has in the past been stigmatized in as a science career. And so it has been very difficult for the risks that you lay out to the career. But I think as a field, it's been very detrimental to the field to have not taken this on sooner. And I think it's allowed anti-science sentiment to rise, and it's resulted in poor public policy decisions. And this is one reason I started this podcast was, I think we need a rational view in public policy, and we need to change the discussion and challenge anti-science viewpoints at high levels. So, and I've seen how really good science communicators get the message across. Carl Sagan, yeah, amazing job. Neil deGrasse Tyson, also, they're so quick on their feet. They have relatively good responses, but they get so much vitriol from fellow scientists. They're not real scientists now that they're talking to the media. I can understand the hesitation of someone who is looking for an academic career to do this.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I worry about scientists who are trying to make a name in academia, especially early on, trying to communicate science when it's just not appreciated in terms of their impact. But I do think as you go along your career trajectory, where you're more willing to accept more risk or limit the risk and recognize the reward, then I would encourage, and I do it often. I'll say, you should talk to this person, or, it doesn't even have to be, science communication. People think you're supposed to be on TV or something else. It could be, a reporter calls me and wants to ask me about, river river flow. And I'm like, listen, I don't know anything about river flow, but I know the guy. And let me email this person and I'll talk to him and say, hey, listen, this guy's just going on background. He just needs it. This is a good reporter. I know this reporter. You should talk to this person. And, that's how I think a lot of times, that's good science communication. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to have your name in print.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, okay, that's true. Yeah. Another thing that I notice in the public debate these days is that there's loss of trust, I think, in institutions and in scientists in general. And, maybe it's because of bad communication skills. I often lay a bunch of the blame of science illiteracy on journalists, though, for, feeling the need to give equal time to extreme minority opinions. I don't know how to counter that. Can just improved science communication solve this problem, or are there other things behind this that we need to deal with?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's space for, improvement. But I mean, at the end of the day, one of the biggest challenges is that science moves slow. And, when we were growing up, it was a big deal when we had one of those, cordless phones with a big antenna, that had spread out 3 feet or, a meter. And then, so incrementally for us, for folks about our age, phones have changed dramatically. So everything's moving really fast and things move fast and sound bites are shorter and people only click on on a website for a couple seconds, and science is slow. It's fine that it's slow. We're comfortable with. I like slow, right? Nobody else wants slow. It's like American baseball. I always think about science as like American baseball, really slow, 162 games, all these rules, all these regulations. It's kind of hard to follow. And I think most of the public wants to watch a soccer match or a hockey match. Boom, get, the strategy in there, but it's very clear where it's going. It's well defined and something's going to happen, and baseball is, it's so drawn out, but that's good. Science moving slow is good. Incremental science is good. The problem is that everybody else and most of the other platforms and media want it faster and faster. So the trick is, and it's not easy, is for scientists and other folks to understand how science works. And I think a lot when we watch things playing out with COVID and other things is that there's a misunderstanding about how science works. We bathe in uncertainty. If I'm certain about something, I'm not going to spend any time on it, right? I want to be in the uncertain world. I want to explore. Everybody else wants certainty. And so we have to try to understand and maybe educate folks about how science works, and that we actually want to celebrate, the slowness, and think of it as kind of our safety net for everything that moves so fast.
Yeah, it's and that's maybe a little bit the fault of Hollywood, I think.
Yeah.
When you see the scientists come on and they, and there's a pandemic and, oh, we've got the virus now, is, immediately, one guy in his lab suddenly makes the concoction and it's just a problem of distributing it. But no, this isn't how it works. It takes years to do the sort of work that these people do in a day in their lab in the movies. So people have a lot of wrong impressions about the speed. And I know this came out in the COVID and communicating, as we learn more about how the virus spreads, we need to sanitize all the surfaces. Okay, well, that's a precaution. We don't know yet how this virus spreads. Okay, it's through the air now. Oh, well, you didn't say that at first. What's wrong? Why are you lying to us? And that promoted distrust rather than, in me, it promoted trust, because I can see transparently the science progressing from uncertainty to increased evidence. And much of the populace held this against science. Like, science is bad. You guys are telling us wear masks and don't wear masks and sanitize surfaces, and now that's not important. Like, you guys don't know what you're talking about. I don't know how to.
I totally agree. I mean, I had a backseat. I basically watched the pandemic, and it was the inspiration for finally me, licking the stamp on this book. Is I think all these scientists, all these engineers, these responders, all these folks during the pandemic are just heroes. And I don't think folks have any idea what went down. And then, we always talk about in the U.S., at least, the Manhattan Project. And we made a bomb in a couple of years. And, that was our momentous time. And, the greatest generation. There was a pretty impressive scientific healthcare generation right when went down during COVID. And I don't think folks have any idea how impressive science, basic science and applied science and engineering and healthcare and medicine just delivered.
Yeah. No, it saved millions of lives getting that vaccine out. I mean, it was an amazing effort to do that so quickly. And people, and it increased anti-science sentiment in the end.
Yeah. It's hard to wrap around that. Like, I have a hard time thinking that some of my peers who have had death threats for other type of research, it is hard for me to wrap around that, but I think we want to go and not, dismiss these folks. I mean, obviously we don't want to support violence, but I do think we want to make a closer look. Say, why are these people so mad? They want to put a death threat on the internet, which is, not good, and possibly get you arrested. Right. So what is making these folks so angry? And, I don't know anything about political science or anything like that. But it's hard to watch this all play out, to see these folks, who are trying so hard, get death threats. And it's hard. It's hard to watch these people who dedicated their lives. And I truly believe, because I had my own troubles working in the Deepwater Horizon, that, these folks are going to feel some serious burnout. And I don't know where it is. I don't know where the data is, but, we have to be on the lookout that we had a tremendous amount of firepower into all these folks. And hopefully that they're going to be okay, because they burned hot for 3 years.
Yeah, for sure. It's nice that we're starting to see the decrease, the tailing curve of this, and thanks mainly to those heroic efforts of the scientists that did work to get these vaccines out.
Yeah, healthcare. I think about these
first responders,
all these people.
Frontline healthcare. It's crazy.
And you know what? I will tell you that at least in my town, the teachers for my kids' schools and the school system who got our kids back in, which, these kids stayed out of school any longer. I mean, it would been devastating for all around. And my school system found a way to get these kids back in, and I think they're heroes too. There's a lot of, I think we need to think a little less about the negative and think about the positive and celebrate some really fantastic, victories that we had during COVID. I mean, we don't want to say it was bad, but I think we need to look closely about the good things. In an unfortunate, really unfortunate, event.
Yeah. So we're getting towards the end here. Maybe it would be nice if you could summarize the take-home messages from your book. What are the key points of advice that you would give scientists for communicating science to the public? Are there is there like a take-home message that is what are the most important theses of your book?
I would say start out being kind, appreciate who you're going to speak to, and try to figure out how you can make a successful outcome. You want to walk into every communication and say, can I leave this person nourished? And if you don't feel comfortable about leaving that conversation, then you might want to reevaluate. Think about these interactions as not an opportunity to spiel about your newest, biggest mass spectrometer, but thinking about how every interaction is a way in which somebody feels like they learned something, that they feel better, that they know something. I have these sayings, and I train students occasionally, is you want to make dinner. So if you're giving a presentation at lunchtime and you're at dinner with your family or friends or whoever, you say, you know what? I saw this talk today, and this person said that. And so I want folks and scientists to think about everybody. There's no roadmap, right? Everybody has a different style. You play to your comforts. But at the end of the day, you should be aware that what you want is a successful outcome, that you want folks to feel like they learned something, or at least you gave them a new perspective. And then after that, there's a lot that goes into it, but that should be your motivation.
And part of that you've made clear is researching who you're talking to, understanding what their angle is, what do they want, why are they asking you for this information? Because not all of it is because they want to take part in your expertise.
It's rare that somebody like you wants to talk to me, as just another scientist. I mean, for the most part, if somebody's calling me or wants to talk to me, they're calling me for a reason. There's a zillion people in this world. They're calling me because they have an answer. And if I say yes, now my responsibility or my goal is to nourish them. And if I can't, I got to figure out a way to make them feel like they were nourished. Like, hey, listen, I don't know the answer, but here's 3 people you might want to think of. Or, you know what, I saw this paper once. Let me send you this paper, and things like that. But it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes you, I got to tell you, you feel good when you do a good job. And I tell scientists, do it for yourself. And I think, and that makes scientists a little bit more human. And that'll help.
Yeah. And communication isn't easy, right? This is something that I've learned, it's easy to communicate with other scientists. Communicating your work to the public takes a very high level of understanding and work to not to dumb it down, but to use vocabulary that people understand, not to use your acronyms and your secret words that you use among scientists that people don't understand. You want to put things forward in a common sense way. You want to make analogies that stand up. That takes preparation and work. And I think, if you can do that, you are making a useful product. And that's something that, we all struggle with, I think, but the best communicators among us make it look easy.
Yeah. But from a lot of practice. Yeah, I mean, I guess obviously some folks feel more comfortable, but you don't have to be glib to be a good science communicator. I cannot write a good tweet. It takes me 2 hours to do something kind of clever and smart. I just fail at Twitter, so I don't do it. I do it, right now I'm doing it to promote my book, but I'm just not a good tweeter. But there's probably a lot of people who don't do very good podcasts, but they're heck of a tweeters, or, they can write a good letter to the editor, or, you got to find and play to your strengths and your comfort zones, and then occasionally step out your comfort zone, but only when you can understand the risk versus the reward, and that it's going to be beneficial for all, or it looks like it's going to be.
Yeah, okay. I think that's a good place to end our discussion. It's been great having you on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your wisdom with us, and best of luck with your book. Thanks for coming on. I'm going to send you a Rational View t-shirt for spending your time and talking to us.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate it. Thanks, Chris.
Well, I had a great time. Super fun. Thank you, Al.
All right. Bye-bye.
If you'd like to follow up with more in-depth discussions, please come find us on Facebook at The Rational View and join our discussion group. If you like what you're hearing, please consider visiting my Patreon page at patron.podbean.com/therationalview. Thanks for listening.